Well, thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And also thank you to Karthik for joining us also. So Karthik Rama is the procurement doctor, a procurement practitioner with years of experience in the industry, and who uses his deep expertise to help various organisations around the world in transforming their troubled procurement processes. So Karthik joins us today to talk about the roles of procurement and IT during a digital transformation. So big topic, but Karthik has been on both sides of the process. So this gives him that crucial insight, I think, into the language of technology on the IT side and the language of procurement on the other. So thank you, Karthik, and welcome to the webinar today.
Hey, Duncan, thank you for having me on. It's a pleasure coming on the webinar with you.
Fantastic. Well, look, what we'll do today is we'll discuss three things, really, which is those two spheres that I mentioned, IT on the one side, procurement on the other. We'll look at the objectives of digital transformation from an IT perspective, from an IT and a procurement perspective. We'll look at how the information required for decision making differs between those two units. And also we'll look at how to keep both of the functions aligned during the transformation process and beyond. So before we dive into all of that, though, first, could you just tell us a little bit more about some of the digital transformation projects that you've worked on over the years, what was involved and the scope of some of these?
Yeah, sure. You summarized the overall topic in such a good way. It almost seemed like a synopsis of a book. the problems between IT and procurement and how do we fix this problem. Thank you so much for that synopsis, Duncan. So my experience or the projects that I've done that involved IT and procurement, I'll also allude towards the IT and procurement based ones, although I do pick up a lot of projects where it's pure business process transformation as well. And then eventually, as an output of the business process transformation, the digital transformation also gets evolved, right? So that's the basis of a lot of my projects as well. It's because there are a lot of people who want to change, but they don't know how to change, and they want to look to a tool to just, why don't we just adopt this and our issues are resolved. That isn't the case, unfortunately, all the time. You need to know where you are at, and from there you get into the tool. So I've had my career started back in 2008, and the first one was where I was a procurement guy, and then they were one of the top three companies that dealt with chemicals and research and things like that in the lines of Dove Chemicals. So they had like, I think more than 25 ERPs and each plant site had a different ERP. And they had one big tool in the front end, or they wanted to have one big tool. And it was so desperate in terms of their overall architecture from a technology standpoint, as well as a business process. So I was in that organization as a procurement guy, right? Procurement guy, and the touch out there was, it was a new center of excellence that was supposed to be set up. And they were trying to bring in the business process as well as a technology that could help it all. And right. It was back 2008. You can imagine how archaic the stuff was. So we firstly had to build everything on an Excel sheet, ensure that the process works, and then try to replicate it in the system. So that's how big the transformation was. And it was done, it's a multi-year project as well, because we wanted to streamline their supplier onboarding process, the strategic sourcing process. And then they had a huge backlog of vendor payments that were stuck. So that was one of the things that I was a front end guy. And then I went into a consultative, became the functional consultant who was kind of delivering the message to the consulting firm. And then I moved into the consulting firms itself. So it varies from, I've been to close to 20 different countries trying to deploy these solutions. So culturally as well, it matters, right? How things work in a particular country. Is it better off doing an email, or is it worthy of having that extra chat to ensure things move forward? So even those things as well. From an industry standpoint, insurance industry, manufacturing, automotives, medical equipment, ships and ship repair. So it's a nice, vast experience. And the reason I'm still stuck to this job is no 2 days are the same. And I keep learning day in and day out. And I learn and improve myself from my customers itself. They're the biggest source of knowledge for me personally. because that's what keeps me going.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, and I think you're absolutely right. That learning aspect is absolutely crucial to continue enjoying one's career, right?
Absolutely, that's been a driving force for me all through my life.
And of course, digital transformation is all about the data. You mentioned it there, and that can also provide useful insight to other functions in the business. And I just wondered, who do you find, through your experience, have been the typical stakeholders that you need to consider in a procurement transformation project?
Okay, yeah, data is a must, right? When I spoke to you about the archaic processes, the Excel sheets, we pulling in the root cause analysis, all of that was we trying to have a streamlined data. It was non-standard. Everybody did stuff in their own little way. So data is key for you to business process data, and then the tool, the technology itself, and many a change management is another piece. So from a data is key, and if you look at it from a stakeholder standpoint, I would say IT, legal, finance, the business for sure. Procurement is there any day. And I would also mention suppliers as well, because we don't bring them in the picture. Or if you might want to at least check out with the top spend suppliers and get their feedback as well. Because they're the guys using most of these procurement tools as a front end. So gather their feedback as well, and don't just go by your in-house things. It's a larger data set. Maybe you can just run an NPS survey with all your suppliers and ask them, these are the 4 tools. What do you think? And that will give you a nice idea which tool are these guys alluding to. Or you might get to know, have another box and let them tell you which tool they like the most. Because just like our end users, people are raising the requisitions. Even the suppliers are a huge chunk of the user base, although procurement team don't consider it. They think that we are on the upper hand and they need to use the system that we dictate, right? So that would be another good piece. And definitely, if you're tying it to data, the IT folks, now, if you're deploying a contract management solution under procurement, then the legal folks need to be your best friends, right? They got to be your best friends. If you're doing a strategic sourcing deployment or a P2P deployment, or your overall implementation needs to deliver an ROI, so you need to have good friendship with the finance folks so that you and them, what you're talking, makes sense, right? If there is an impact to your ERP, or like I said in my example, way back from 2008, I got 42 ERPs, and this system needs to talk to all 42 of them. Then you got to have the IT team that they need to understand what is it that you're trying to do. Else, it might be a big mess up for sure.
And while procurement, on the one hand, is responsible for defining the use case for their project, IT, of course, has other considerations that it needs to bear in mind, and that impacts how they are going to approach the project. So I was wondering, what should procurement perhaps be aware of when they're thinking about what those considerations that IT will be thinking about are when you're making technology decisions?
So, based on my experience, Duncan, what I've seen is one is hardware sizing, right? I know things are on the cloud, but still there's integrations and there's customized integrations, the servers, the data centers. So it's important to have that hardware sizing. Procurement needs to understand what's the lead time within a night. For instance, I had a customer in Abu Dhabi, it was a bank. And for me, until then, procuring a data center was not a big deal. But for them, it's a matter of 6 months because there are 150 approvals that they're taking because it's bank data, right? It's personal data. So I didn't think of it that way because of my experience. So that's where you need to also consider those aspects, the lead time, the data center requirements again. Not all the, like if it's a new tool, an upcoming startup, they might not have a local data center. If you have specific regulatory requirements per country, right? Like in Saudi or in China, you cannot you cannot buy a tool that doesn't have house the data in country. So you need to have that in your mind as well. It may seem silly, but people forget. They don't think of it. These things are forgotten, right? You need to also understand the flexibility of our IT folks, or the amount of customization they're okay with, or the few IT folks are very rigid and they say no. nothing doing. You just go with the best practice, whatever the tool gets you, you do it, right? Another one is considerations of skill or the availability of resources in our IT team. Is it something completely new? Will they be able to take it up? That again drives into administrative considerations, because if do you want to keep the administration with you as procurement, or do you want the IT team to help you with it? Obviously, if it's I was talking to a client recently, and I was just doing like a freelance, a free consulting. They were trying to, they have something that their licenses are about to expire, and they're investigating on taking a new tool. So I asked them a series of questions, and at the end I asked, what is your user base? They told 500-600 users. So obviously I cannot have procurement manage the administrative activities. I want someone from IT. It's a full-time role. If it's someone, so I cannot have that person sit in procurement. So, but a lot of the tools I know today, almost every tool, the cloud tool, the administrative tasks are pretty simple, but still it is a task. It does take an effort. You need to be focusing. It's not like you can run an RFP and add a user to a particular group together. If you do a mistake, then it might be it could be problematic, right? Because it's user permissioning. So that's what I'm talking about. So these are the things that come to my mind, Duncan. I know that's a long list, but it's an important one.
Absolutely. And something else came to mind actually as you were explaining the aspects of that process. In the buying phase, so when you're looking to procure the different software or the solution, have you used proof of concept before? Could those be a useful tool to see how a solution will play out?
It's still a dicey subject. Not everyone does a proof of concept, so it's also a convincing thing for you. If you're doing a proof of concept, you cannot do a proof of concept to one system and select it. All your solution providers should give you a proof of concept. You have at least 3, I would say, right? And then once you do, and then it's an apples to apples comparison. Unfortunately, not everyone has that kind of time, or even the solution provider doesn't want to invest for 3 months, 6 months. The other problems that you see, Duncan, when you do proof of concepts is it's still not a full blown out solution. The integration is not there. It's sample data set, right? But it does still get you someplace if you are the person who wants to look, touch, and feel, and then believe. Then it works out well. But for me, proof of concepts, and this is just me. I don't know whether it's everyone thinks of it this way, but for me, I've tried it twice, and I personally, I think the pre-sales guy coming and giving the demonstration is helpful. If you ask them, tell them that would you be able to give me a few test user IDs? We'll have an NDA, and do that. That's enough, right? But I don't want to have like a full-blown 3 month, 6 month thing. Test out a few things and get it over with. It's because it's a lot of investment and a lot of time, and I don't know whether it's a difficult planning exercise for you to before you buy a thing. Unless you have 1 year to buy, then maybe you could do a proper proof of concept. But these days, what happens is they realize that, oh, we got budget and we need to buy something. Let's get over with this money that's left out in the kitty. And that's when you start the initiation process. And then it's a matter of there's already a decision made in somebody's mind. So it's just a matter of him convincing the other people. So it's not done religiously, is what I say. And that's where, so the proof of concept, if you have a good 6 month lead time, then I would do a proof of concept. That's probably one of the better ways of doing it.
Well, I'm glad you said that though at the end, because full disclaimer here. So from the HICS side, we do promote the concept of going through a POC. So because as you say, if it's done correctly, and I think that's the key thing, right? If it's
that's right.
done correctly and planned for, then you can get a lot more insight into how the solution will actually play out in a live environment, for example.
Absolutely. So you're absolutely right. If you like I use the word religiously, right? If you do it religiously, you are heart attack sure that this is what I want. That's where you'll get at.
Yeah.
But it's like it's a lot of planning, a lot of background. So even before you get to this step, you need to know what you want, and that's key. Even if you get into the proof of concept thing, and maybe you should have all that ironed out: the business case, the use case, your BRD, all of that. And then once you're strong on what exactly you want, then you can pick up whoever you want and try to do a POC with them, and then you'll be much easier for you to make that decision. You're right.
Absolutely. And I think there's another key point which you mentioned, which is it has to be done when you get to your short list, because firstly, you don't want to be doing loads of them.
You go crazy.
Yeah, right. And equally, you've got to be able to do a like-for-like comparison, right, for the business problem.
See, unfortunately, you see, like Duncan, what I've seen is few companies are not sure whether they want the entire, they want to replace the entire source to pay cycle, or they want to replace just the contract management piece, or just a supplier onboarding piece. They're not sure of that either, and they're running an RFP. And as a part of the RFP, they want to understand whether they're going to buy a source to pay the entire gamut of things or the subset of. They don't even have a strategy defined that I'll do the end-to-end thing and I'll mix and match. Maybe I'm okay with the mix and match, or I do need to buy just one tool and that should do everything for me. So they don't even have that clear in their mind either, and they're going to buy something. It's like I'm going into a shop. I want to buy a car. I don't know whether it's a hatchback or a limousine or a car that I can take on rental. You got these million options. So I don't know how will you even make a decision. You go crazy trying to take a decision. And unfortunately, many teams are like that. They're in that state of mind. They're buying.
And talking about that, actually, obviously, there's a lot that procurement can do to help to bring it back to the IT topic. What procurement can do to help IT when they're making their case for technology solutions. So they've identified the use cases, but they do have to pitch it to other functions within the business as well. So from your experience, what's the best way of approaching how you translate use cases into the language of IT?
Firstly, involve them way ahead of time. The ID folks, that's key, and there's no harm in involving. The reason being is you need some time. You can't do it as a hush-hush exercise that happens in like a week's time, right? So you need some time for these stuff. The other thing is we need to understand the pain areas of IT as well, so that this concept that they say, "What's in it for me?" So you need to get their piece of the pie as well, and that will show that it's like a mutual exercise. Unfortunately, procurement is like, I need this needs to be done, and this is what the end state should be. That's how the communication is, and that doesn't work to a large extent. We need to articulate what the business drivers are. They need to, even though they're not the business folks, they need to understand in their brain. They don't need to point to you every time there's something to do with the business. They should at least understand at a high level of what it is, because it's not compulsory that you might have it's not a compulsion that you have the IT and the procurement, the guy in the same calls every time, right? There's certain times the vendor is there and this is an IT thing, and they don't need to park it every time. They should be at least to some sort of on the same page. From a translation standpoint, the other thing is it's key from the procurement side. Every company has an IT department, and I'm hoping that you also have a specialized buyer who's buying IT equipment, or a cat manager, or a sourcing, or whatever you call in your organization. It could be a director or whatever.
And do you see IT as an enabler in the relationship?
So this is completely. So I'm going to give you the usual, and this might get you angry. It depends. Okay, the answer, or the famous answer of a consultant, it depends. And I'll tell you what it depends on. It depends on the industry. What is it that your organization is buying? For instance, if you're an advanced technological company, then they're definitely the enabler. They're crazy, and they're trying to hound for the latest technology, and they want to be high tech, right? So they're still open and very enabling. For instance, if you're getting into a public procurement sector, or maybe education, or the government, or banking, Then they're like the traditional guys who are just the gatekeepers. They don't let anyone go past them. So that's what I've seen to a large extent. But the world is evolving to a large extent. People, the few leaders these days, whether it's the CPOs, CEOs, or CFOs, they know that there's a lot of social media activity and all this as well. Even with if you're seeing your competition heading a particular direction, taking a particular tool, they have AI, RPA. So that's the next shiny object, and this leader also wants to follow that. So you see that happening a lot as well. So that could be another driver. So if the CTO is of that kind, so he will push for the latest technologies. So this is what I've seen, and it basically it depends. And it's still getting very progressive. The traditional technology is maybe the traditional background that they had from the IT folks, that is going lesser and lesser, except for certain industries such as the government or universities or whatever may be the case.
And of course, when you're going through the process of implementation and afterwards, in fact, it is going to require resources from IT. So I was wondering, what's your view in terms of how procurement can be mindful of the resources that are required? And then more generally, what advice would you give in terms of maintaining a good working relationship between the two functions?
Mm-hmm. So like one that I've already told, it should be the cat manager of the IT. Mm-hmm. Potentially maybe two of them if they're available, and you should make them it's not just you assign them to the project, you should give them some time carve out some time out of the daily life to support this activity. Unfortunately, that's not the case both on IT and procurement side. You already have a day job and they last us on to that. That's one key thing. I've seen that as a success. I've seen 9 out of 10 times that work out well, because if you look at it, this IT category manager also is potentially working with the same vendor for the technology. Now, let's flip over to the IT side. From the IT side as well. So traditionally in both these teams, what they do is the guy who's sitting free or the girl who's sitting free is given the project because it's like now it's a matter of executing or deploying it, right? So we shouldn't do that. We shouldn't do that. We have to have everybody has a purpose in the project. It's not a hobby, right? So you need to ensure that you have the right folks. So on the procurement side, you could do that. On the IT side, whoever is the closest to the business, the first point of contact, always. And it's all a matter of having these two people and have clear-cut rules and regulations and an escalation path. And this same thing should happen even at the leadership level as well. There should be a clear alignment in the overall organization, and the communication is key out here, without which all of this would fall flat.
Yeah, I think those are two excellent points, the alignment and the communication. Would you say those are the two kind of biggest factors in terms of overcoming any challenges that you might see within the collaboration of procurement and IT, that it's the alignment, it's the communication?
Absolutely, that's one of the biggest ones. And it not just overlays in for this particular scenario between IT and procurement, it overlays across their deployment. But whoever the other stakeholders or even the business process changes that you're bringing in, it is key. Unfortunately, what's happening is in these kind of one-off projects, your day-to-day job, you still okay. You do communicate because you're used to following that. This is an ad hoc activity. There's no structured process, and that's why you have all these waterfall project management therapy, agile methodology. They gave these is because you ensure that it goes well, because it's a once in a lifetime thing or once in a couple of years thing, and we need to follow that. And unfortunately, we're going as though the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing, and that's how things are getting worked on, unfortunately. And it's key.
Mm-hmm. And also, you've mentioned before centres of excellence. I've seen you discuss those. What for you are the benefits of this approach of having a centre of excellence?
Yeah, the first one and the obvious one is cost saving, because center of excellence in all probability isn't going to be in the same country that your team is at. Yeah, you
Mhm.
potentially could offshore it, and this isn't outsourcing either, guys. So it's an center of excellence. There's a meaning to the word, right? It's an offshore team which might not be as expensive. So you're saving on your rentals, your real estate, your resource cost, right?
Mhm.
And you have your the other tangible, maybe intangible, could be reduction in your rework, improvement in your accuracies, lesser burden in reporting. So all these are kind of byproducts of it. So that's how you could do it. Um, the center could potentially pay for itself. So it's delivering enough savings out of your previous life that it could pay for itself potentially if you're running it the right way. There's definitely standardization, is because there's and the reason I'm calling standardization here is even now I think many folks think center of excellence means it has to be an English-based center of excellence, and I don't agree with that. I would say that language doesn't matter. It could be there could be a team that's managing the Mexican queries, team that's managing the Japanese queries, whatever countries that you're in. It could still be the same center of excellence, and we could have resources who are who know that language, can speak in that language, and still manage the overall business process. Imagine you being a CPO, and CPO these days every company has a different hierarchy. Let's say CPO or VP of a procurement organization for the entire world. And then there are multiple, you work in, let's say, 60 countries,
Mhm.
and you need to, and the 60 countries have 60,000 different ways of processing their sourcing event or requesting a supplier to be onboarded. So at least you have this one team that's sitting in between and being that bridge. And we could have a global template across. And then you cannot force the Mexicans to follow the American process. You might still have some better tweaks, but at least you have a parent level data which will let you know that the overall company can look at an enterprise level, and then there are minor tweaks in country which you can manage. So those are the benefits that I see, or the benefits of a center of excellence. There are many more, but these are the things that come to my mind.
And you mentioned there actually people might have different views of the center of excellence, what it does, what it should be achieving, and how you set it up. So kind of leads into my next question actually, which is how should they be set up and structured?
Yeah. So this is again, we should have a clear cut understanding of the business processes. There's a lot of investigation out here that has to go in. Business process need to have a clear cut pain areas that need to be drawn out, maybe from your audit reports or audit reports or the feedback of the end user or the people running in the processes, things that you can adopt from one country to the other, or one business process to the other. So you need to make a complete list of those things. There has to be a clear business case. Um, like I spoke about, the service center could pay for itself, right? So you need to define that right at the beginning, saying
Mhm.
that what is it that you want to achieve? What are you going to get at the end of the service center getting deployed? Understanding of the business drivers. So this is another key thing. Finalizing whether you want to do it in India, Philippines, or in your country. Maybe in your country also makes sense if you're not too big an organization. If you want to centralize, I've done centers of excellence even for organizations in country as well, because before they were scattered at the plant sites for specifically for a procurement organization. We
Mhm.
had two procurement guys sitting in each plant for a manufacturing plant, and then we had the corporate office. And then over the years, there was no corporate office desk for procurement guys back in the 90s and 80s, right? It was more so on the indirect side that the India procurement team used to sit out of one office, and this might not have even been in the corporate office. It might be another building or something. And slowly, it started getting centralized. So people now still, even those procurement roles that were sitting at the plant side, they
Mhm.
created another role which was not typically. It was one of the additional tasks that the procurement guys used to do, and now they split up and they were managing their task, and they pulled in all the procurement folks into the corporate. So that's how they made it a centralized procurement teams. So this exercise could also happen in country, but it's more so it depends on how much pain you're going through as an organization, and if you want to have a complete view of the picture as such. I've majorly done captive center of excellence where it's me, Procurement Doctors Consulting Limited. I have a big procurement team across the world, and then I said, well, I want to centralize this or have a center of excellence in India. So I built my own team, working with internally by hiring people and things like that. If you're building your own team, then it makes sense to obviously hire experienced guys for the first 2 or 3 years, right from the leadership to every level. You just need to, for instance, there's a job that requires 2 to 4 years of experience. You might want to hire a person who's 4 years experience for that job, at least for the first 3 years, and then slowly you could reduce the expenses of the resources itself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a little bit earlier on, you mentioned actually artificial intelligence, machine learning, new technologies. In fact, so the shiny new things that are enticing. Now, also, there's obviously new use cases that emerge within procurement as well on an ongoing basis. So what's your advice for people to stay on top of those trends or what's taking place?
If you're going with a tool, a procurement tool or a technology, it's a big investment. No matter how cheap it gets, it's year over year, it's a pretty big money, right? And it's a lot of people getting affected still. So ideally, this ties to the category strategy of that purchase, right? And the category strategy is you need to reevaluate the relationship every so often. Part of the reevaluation is seeing if they're giving what you are set out to give. Are the people using what they initially thought the system to be used for, right? And this is all starts off right at the time of purchase as well. So you're setting up certain KPIs, certain rules at the time of purchase, at the time of go live, and then you want to monitor yourself in terms of the usage pattern. If you have promised your leadership saying that this tool is going to give me such and such benefits in terms of ROI or user satisfaction or whatever, all that needs to be tracked, it needs to be followed. And if not anything, if you're a lazy procurement guy, a lazy category guy, at least keep it at the time of the renewal of the contract. If the your contract's for 3 years, start off this activity at 2.5. Have a reminder on your calendar, or let your procurement tool remind you about it. And I would say the leadership might not remember this, although they have a million other things to meet in the balance sheets and many other goals. But this is a technology. So this is like a partnership. So when I say category strategy as well, Duncan, it's the CAT manager, the category director, working with the IT head and saying, what are your purchases this year?
Right.
What you're basically strategizing at that level and then bringing this, folding this in, right? And the feedback piece as well. Whatever what the audits, the policies, the procedures, the feedback, all this needs to be folded into the process of reevaluating or looking at the latest technology. And the example you spoke of in the beginning as well, right? Don't go for that next shiny object as well. Be logical. Maybe your business process, you're not fully mature enough to even consume that. I see this happening a lot in the Middle East more so. They don't even need that tool, but they start buying it just because their competition has bought it. So they're better off without it, or even if they took it, they won't be able to use it to the extent that they need. So somebody needs to be there to stand up and say that. If I would tell this to a customer as well, is because I don't want to. No matter how good a job I did, they would be not satisfied with the tool. Tomorrow they would say it might come back on me, saying that, oh man, Karthik fooled us on this. So I would not do that.
And just to round off then, and going back to the title of the webinar, I'd love to just capture your final thoughts on what are the key ingredients for a successful procurement and IT collaboration. Any anecdotes that you've got of where you've seen it work really well, some examples of what made that a success, or any final pieces of advice that you've got?
So everything that I said. So learn to be in each other's shoes. That's important. You always keep wearing the IT hat, and you don't want to take that off. So at least think from the other person's view. That I think that goes a long way. And definitely, like I spoke right in the beginning, having the right people, the right team members, like the representation of IT category manager or director on the project. Same with the IT side as well. And when in doubt, involve each other. It's important to involve each other. There's no harm in involving them, and then they say no. I really don't need to be on that meeting or the discussion. That it's better off that than not involving at all and just regretting it later. So these are the things that come to my mind, and it's key that you need to give enough time to each other. I've had big projects delayed, like I said that thing in the beginning, right? The hardware sizing issue. We went in and then there were a bunch of new customizations which required to be which needed a separate server because the current server was not helping, and then it basically pushed the project back by 6 months, and we were just sitting there, and it was a loss of money for the client as well as for me and everyone else. So we definitely don't want to be in that situation.
I think those are three really great bullet points and pieces of advice to end on there. So Karthik, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It was a pleasure speaking to you on this topic.
It was a pleasure talking to you, Duncan, and it's been thorough. I've thoroughly enjoyed this discussion. Thank you so much for having me on.